And my point here is who in European Parliament is really serious about economic freedom. I may be seeing things in a very sort of skeptical manner, but I mean, the open question is, when is the last time an economic freedom was openly defended in European Parliament? Or to put it in Kissinger's terms, you remember back in the day, Henry Kissinger said, well, if I'm worried about security in Europe, whom do I give a 3 a.m. call to? So my sort of question is, whom should I call at 3 a.m.? Who in European Union is really, really concerned with economic freedom? So that's one of the first points. And the second point is obviously the lack of economic freedom is expressed in the fact that we spend 50 billion on agriculture. What does it mean? Well, the manned flight to Mars costs around 5 billion. So for the amount of money that we spend on subsidizing people growing potatoes and tomatoes where they shouldn't be grown, we could be sending men to Mars. Probably in the last decade, European Union could have colonized Mars if it really wanted to, but instead it chose to support industries that shouldn't be supported. And that's the result of that. But we're really active at home. I just want to mention two things. I do believe in books. Books are probably the best way to educate people. One of our projects, the economic textbook, currently 75% of all students in Lithuania learning economics from our textbook. We have a 75% market penetration rate, and I believe these kids who are going to grow up, well, they're going to have an excellent view on economics. And not only that, we snatched the Educational Excellence Award in the London Book Fair with that textbook. So that's really something. That's a really long-term investment. Second thing to be glad about, recently we pushed through a bill in Lithuanian Parliament that from now on, May the 11th is the National Respect for Taxpayers Day in Lithuania. It's an official day. Thank you. It's going to be marked on all the calendars. I don't know what's going to come out of it, but I think, well, one day is the least the government can do in respecting the people who actually create all the wealth in the country. So that's the introduction. Now, three things I want to mention. Could we go to the next slide? Yeah, well, many times, like my Georgian friend said, it may seem from abroad that Lithuania is a sort of a land of freedom where everyone is libertarian, have read Hayek and Atlas Shrugged. But, well, sadly, that's not the case. We not so much love freedom as we hate communism. And those are two different things. So we dislike socialism, but we're not really libertarians as such. Now, one of the examples as given usually as a sign of liberty in Lithuania is that we have a 15% flat income tax. And that is true, and that's been for a long time. But this number conceals more than it actually shows. Because if you look at the overall tax burden, if you include social security contributions and healthcare contributions, the actual tax rate is around from 38 to 44% for everyone, which means even that the lowest earning individuals or people with lowest incomes, they're paying around 40% from their income as taxation of one sort or another. So the question you could ask here, is this tax flat enough? Or, and then people want to, and now we're actually having arguments about whether we should introduce progressive income taxation. And obviously one of the arguments that the politicians are saying, well, all civilized countries in Europe have a progressive income tax. That, of course, is not an argument as such, it's just a fact. But my question to them is, why do you want progressive income taxation? Do you want low-income people to pay less, or do you want high-income people to pay more? And these are actually two different questions. So far, what I'm seeing is that they actually want to make sort of more productive members of society pay even more, even though right now they pay around 45 to 50% of their paycheck as taxes. So that's one thing. A second thing that was recently introduced in Lithuania, the so-called social security contributions floors, not ceilings, but floors. What it means is, regardless of how much you make, even if you make €1 per month, you have to pay a fixed fee, a fixed 120 euros to your social security contribution. And if you earn more, of course, that number goes up. So in fact, what we introduced is a regressive taxation in all this definition, or regressive system to fund social security, which is not at all, well, progressive. So that's been introduced. So the thing that worry about me in taxation politics right now, or the discussions we're having in the country right now, is whether we should have a progressive income tax, and I think we shouldn't. The second thing discussed, whether we should have a cap on social security contributions, and I think we should, because currently we do not. So in the way the system works in Lithuania, there is no cap on contributions, but there is cap on payouts. So for instance, if you are a high income earner, you pay a lot into your social security contribution, but your pension does not increase proportionally. So you can have two people, one of them earns not so much and pays not so much, another one earns a lot and pays a lot, but their pensions or their state pensions actually don't differ that much. So that's one reason why actually we have a high degree of shadow economy or gray economy, because it doesn't matter whether you pay a lot or you pay little, you pretty much get the same. And of course, under these circumstances, no one wants to pay a lot. So that's one discussion we're having: should we cap contributions to Social Security? Second thing that is going on, and I think is going in the wrong direction, is basically government is thinking of dismantling second pillar pension funds. So obviously, as many of you might know, we also have a small second pillar contributions. You can send 2% of your Social Security contributions to the second pillar, then you can add 2% from your own pocket, and then you get a 2% subsidy from the government budget. So it amounts to about 50 euros per month from your average salary, which is obviously nothing compared to how much people pay into the state Social Security contribution. But even though the government is thinking of dismantling that in one way or another, well, because some people in the government wrongly believe that this private or second pillar is responsible for low pensions in Lithuania, which of course is not the case. So my point here is, yes, 15% flat income tax is a good thing. I hope we continue to have it, but the actual tax burden is much greater than 15%. It's more, if you count everything, if you count Social Security contribution, if you count healthcare, if you count VAT, it's about 50%. So I wouldn't call Lithuania a country of low taxes. I would probably call it a country with badly administrated taxation. But those are two different things. So that's about taxation. Second slide, please. Another thing that I want to draw your attention to, maybe it's not so prevalent in your country, but at least in my country, I see a great danger of backsliding via the state-owned enterprises, state-owned or municipally owned enterprises. So basically, we have around 300 of them left. For a long time, we thought it's just a remnant of socialism, and we're going to sort of figure out and privatize them all on the way. But sadly, that has not happened, and now these companies are expanding their reach. And that's probably the worst of the unholy union between business and government. Because if government owns the business, obviously the government tailors the rules so it benefits the businesses. And there is no very few checks and balances that actually observe whether the competition is fair. Let me give you an example. A couple of years ago, I think in 2009, a state-owned railway company dismantled rails from Lithuania to Latvia. And they did that so they could force another company to make a 300-kilometer detour so that company would earn more money that way from railway tariffs. So in other words, state-owned enterprise engaged in a form of economic sabotage against other companies in Lithuania, and they totally got away with it because it was a state-owned company. Well, gladly, I think a couple of years ago, European Commission intervened and actually is now forcing the Lithuanian state railway company to rebuild the rails into Latvia, so that the companies don't have to make a 300-kilometer detour. But it took 6 or 7 years to actually draw this problem to someone's attention. So, and there are many, many other instances where now either state-owned enterprises or municipally owned enterprises are expanding their operations. And the problem is that there isn't that many safeguards. We have managed to implement few safeguards, and one of them is that if a state-owned enterprise wants to establish a new company or wants to start doing something different, they have to prove to Competition Council that that is really necessary. So in other words, if state-owned company wanted to establish a bakery, well, I mean, they wouldn't, but just in case they wanted to, they have to prove that bakery is of public interest, that there are no other bakeries, and that the competition laws or that competition rules of competition will not be distorted because the state-owned bakery comes into place. So that's one of the good safeguards. But even now, there are many sort of politicians who want to dismantle that. So my sort of word of advice, especially those in the post-Soviet world, if you have state-owned companies left, don't think they're just going to go away. I think backsliding towards state interventionism and backsliding towards more government control, these are one of the agents through which this can be done. And believe me, there are many people who would gladly sort of lead the state-owned companies into expanding into new markets. So that's a real problem. We have to deal with it. And the last slide, the good thing that we did, actually, and the good thing that the last government and this government did, we did a reform in our labor code. Now, don't worry if you don't see the slide very carefully, because it's small print. But the thing what I wanted to sort of tell you about is that whenever it comes to discussions about what should be done about labor codes or labor regulations, it's very difficult to compare situations across countries. So what we actually did, we took the World Bank data that they collect, and together with them, we published the Employment Flexibility Index for OECD and European Union countries. And you can find that if you go to frima.org/EFI, well, Employment Flexibility Index, a little of advertising here. But that's a really good quantitative evidence-based tool to estimate sort of the levels of flexibility of labor regulation in OECD and European Union countries. So what this research shows us is that with our latest reform, we went up by 9 places, meaning that, yes, now our labor code is more flexible, but not flexible enough. If you wonder who is on top of this flexibility index, is it some Wild West countries? Well, not really, it's Denmark. And that's a great irony that I think is lost in EU and often US politics, is that we look at Scandinavians as a sort of socialists, when in fact, they're kind of a mixture of both. So my point here, use this tool because it covers all these countries if you want to add to your arguments, or if you want to use that as evidence of why we need reforms. So that's the 3 things that I wanted to tell you. My sort of lesson from all these reforms is be careful about backsliding. Even if you implement good reforms, unless you do it like the Georgians did and you put it in the constitution that you cannot raise taxes unless there is a referendum, there is always a chance that good reforms will be dismantled. For instance, we had an excellent reform of higher education, not just of regular education, not just K-12, but universities, that we had a voucher system. We sort of established a voucher system where basically money follows the student, and in a couple of years it was sort of rolled back and dismantled by powerful lobby groups. So my sort of advice, if you manage to push through a good policy, actually spend time and invest resources into defending it. So I'll leave you with these words.
Well,